Welcome to today's lesson 1.3, Round Numbers. Said strong mathematicians can round and compare multi-digit whole numbers. So today we're going to rounding and comparing those two skills. Said so in your notebooks out, so you can put today's date on your notes, along with these information that's going to help you. Said our examples and our helpful hints and strategies to help us compare. So right now, you're going to write this. So I'm going to pause the video right now. You're going to write this down as we go through it, because obviously I'm going to refer back to this as we do today's activity. So our rounding rules said are like this. You want to look at the place value to the right of the one you are rounding. If it is 5 or higher, you round your place value up to the next number. If it is 4 or lower, you keep the place value the same. Then you change all place values to the right of the one you are rounding to zeros. So that's kind of our rounding rules, and we'll see some examples on that next page when we do that. We also have comparing in this section. Said when comparing, we use greater than, less than, and equal to. Obviously, we always talk about that people say the greater than is kind of like that alligator where it's going to eat the bigger number, because the alligator is hungry and it always wants more. So we think of greater than, we think of alligators, and alligators want the bigger amount. So with that, let's dive into some examples of rounding rules and comparing rules. So right now, one of the biggest things is also, like we talked about last lesson, is to read what the instruction, what am I rounding to, and really understand that place value. So I'm going to round to the nearest 1,000. So I need to find the nearest 1,000. So what I always do is I underline the 1,000 place value. And then it said in our notes, says look to the place values to the right of the one we want to round. So I like to underline the place value rounding and draw a nice little arrow to this place value. This says, hey, I'm rounding the 2 of the hundreds. So is 2 closer to 0 or closer to 10? Or there in this number you could say, is 275 closer to 0 or closer to another 1,000? We know that if it's 4 or lower, we round down. So that means my 1 is going to stay the same. And now all the place values to the right of that number are going to change to zeros. So if we were rounding 1,275 to the nearest 1,000, it would be 100. So when you use that same strategy over and over again, you're going to see it happen a lot. So I round to the nearest 1,000, so I underline the place value because I'm rounding to this place value. I draw an arrow and look to the right of that, and then I know that 6 is closer to 10 than it is to 0, which means my 8 is going to go up 1 to 9, and now all these other numbers are going to turn to zeros. So what do I know? I know that 8,000 said 655 rounds to 9,000. Same strategy for the last one. We're going to underline the 5. That's the 1,000 place value. We're going to look at the hundreds place value, one right next to it, which is a 4. We know if it's 4 or lower, we round down. So my 5 is staying the same, and the other 3 place values are turning to zeros. So make sure you pause the video, write this information down as your notes, as your examples to come back to. Said if you have questions when you're working on your problems. The next one would be the hundreds place value. So obviously knowing the place value rounding to, the nearest 100. So you're going to notice right here, the first one, so here's 734. I always like to say the number to myself first. It kind of helps me get an idea of what kind of number I'm dealing with. 734, so I'm the hundreds is 7. I'm looking at the tens place value. It's a 3. We know 4 or lower, the number stays the same. So that means we're going to have 7, and then those place values turn to 0, so we have 700. My next number is 6,249. Whoa, that's bigger than, it doesn't start with 100, it actually starts with 1,000. So what do we do here? Well, we're still going to find the hundreds place value and underline it. We're going to look at the tens place value still. So notice 4, we know rounds down to zeros. So that means my 2 is going to stay the same. But my number is not just 200, it's 6,249. So if I'm rounding 6,249 to the nearest 100, my 6 and 2 stay the same, because that's the place value I'm rounding to. And then I would add 2 zeros to make it into the place values that I had to round. So 6,249 rounded to the nearest 100 would be 6,200. Same thing with this one. We have 8,251. So my hundreds place value is there. I'm looking at the tens place value, which is a 5. We know 5 and higher round up. So my 2 is going to turn into a 3. But I can't just put 300 because it's not just 300. It would be 8,300. Once again, pause the video, write these notes down to help you as you have examples to look back to as you do your own work. The last place value we're going to work on is rounding to the nearest 10. So when we round to the nearest 10, we're going to do that same strategy. We find the 10 value, 87. Here's my tens, which means I'm going to look at my one place value. 7, 7's closer to 5 or higher, we round up. So the 8 will turn to a 9, and then my ones place value becomes a 0. So 87 rounded to the nearest 10 is 90. 193, I'm still looking for the tens place value. So I still got to go to the tens place value. I'm going to look at the one to the right, which is the ones. 3, we know that 4 or less keep the number the same. So 193 rounded to the nearest 10 would be 190. Here we have 5,114. Can we still round to the nearest 10? You betcha. We just got to figure out, here's my tens place value. I'm going to look at my ones place value. We know 4 or lower, that number will stay the same. I need to keep all the numbers to the left of that number. This bring it with it. So I have 5,110. So as you pause the video, write these down. So now you have examples of how we've rounded thousands, we've rounded to tens, and we've rounded to the nearest 100. So you have those examples to use and reference. The last skill we talked about today is comparing numbers. So one of the big things with comparing numbers, you want to check to make sure, like I said, you're going to look at, they both have 4 place values. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's a great place to start. We know that the number of place values are the same. So we always want to start when we compare by the biggest place value. So you notice the 9 and the 9 are the same. So those would be equal. Here we have 100, and here we have 700s. Well, I know that 700 is bigger than 100. So no matter what the other smaller place values are, we know right now that 9,172 is less than 9,712. Same thing we first checked to make sure that the same number of place values. We have 4 and 4. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look again. We have 5 and 5, 2 and 2, 9 and 6. Whoa, that was close. I thought those were actually equal at first. Notice how 9s and 6s sometimes can be confusing, so make sure you take your time and go digit by digit, place value by place value. So we have the 9 and the 6 where I notice my first difference, which means 9 is bigger than 6, so 5,296 is greater than 5,269. Except for last problem, we see 7,684, 7,684. Wait. It felt like I said the same thing twice because I did say the same thing twice because these numbers are equal. So that's when you need to pause the video. You'll use those strategies as you work on your own problems. Right now, I take these numbers and I'd like you to round them to the nearest 1,000. So you can pause the video right now, work on completing these problems of rounding to the nearest 1,000. Said with these problems, you can now round to the nearest 100. So make sure you pause the video and round each of these to the nearest 100. And you can now round these to the nearest 10. Let's fix this. 3. Now your turn. And you can round these now to the nearest 10. And last but not least, we're comparing what you compare all 3 of these numbers. Show me which one is greater than, less than, or equal to. As always, is that if you have any questions or comments, you want to jot those notes down so when we get a chance to talk about them, you can discuss them. If you found additional strategies that make you successful, please feel free to jot those down because we love to share things that might help other students experience the same level of success that you have.